Well, once again, thanks to the amazing homebrew community on the Nintendo Switch, and with the help of some really useful and important overclocking tools and various other homebrew tools, it is possible to run Red Dead Redemption on the Nintendo Switch at 60 frames per second. Of course, you need a modified Switch to do this, but let's go ahead and see how it's done. Today's video is brought to you by Surfshark VPN. With internet privacy being such a huge deal these days, it's more important now than ever to protect yourself. With Surfshark VPN, you can easily hide your IP address and encrypt all data that you send and receive. You can easily switch regions to other countries in the world. This means not only your true IP address and identity is masked, it also means you can get around any annoying geolocation locked video content. You know, the ones that say, this video isn't supported in your country? This can get annoying for me when I want to watch local Aussie news. With Surfshark VPN, I can switch my country to Australia and this problem simply goes away. Surfshark VPN also allows you to connect to unlimited devices simultaneously on a single account. And this includes Windows devices, Linux, Android, iOS, Amazon Fire TV, and much more. To get an exclusive Surfshark deal, enter promo code MVG for an extra 3 months free at surfshark.deals/MVG. And if you think it sucks, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee, which will give you plenty of time to try out Surfshark VPN risk-free. So Red Dead Redemption released on August the 18th for the Nintendo Switch and Sony PlayStation 4. And some people in the community were a little disappointed to see that it had a locked 30 FPS frame cap. Now, if you run the game on the Nintendo Switch, you will immediately notice that there isn't much in terms of enhancements, outside of the fact that the game is actually running on the Nintendo Switch. However, the performance of the game in this particular mode is a steady 30 frames per second with the occasional hitch here and there, but overall it is pretty good as far as a port of Red Dead Redemption. On handheld mode, it runs at a 720p resolution, and when you dock the game into your Switch dock, it runs at 1080p. So this in of itself is a pretty impressive undertaking. As far as I know, there's no dynamic resolution or anything like that. The game just kind of locks at 1080p when you play in docked mode and 720p when you play in handheld mode. Now the question is, can we overclock the Nintendo Switch, uncap the frame rate, and get it to run at 60 FPS? Well, let's go ahead and give this a try. Now for this particular test, I'm going to run the game in handheld mode because this gives us more flexibility as far as how much we can push certain values. Now, with any type of overclocking that I do on the Nintendo Switch, I have to give you the disclaimer, and that is, if you are someone that is interested in overclocking your Nintendo Switch or you have the means to do it, then disclaimer here, I'm not responsible if you push your Nintendo Switch beyond the limit and destroy your Switch. This is purely for educational purposes only, and do so at your own risk. Now with that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump in with some tests. Now you can see here running the game in handheld mode with no overclocking whatsoever, you can see the game runs at 30 frames per second as we mentioned, and this is running at 720p resolution in handheld mode. Now with some really cool tools that have been developed by the homebrew community, specifically a Switch homebrew developer known as Masagrata, who's been around for many years. He's built many different tools when it comes to Switch homebrew, and many of them, I might add, are extremely useful. And the tools that we are going to use today comprise of Reverse NX, and this allows us to essentially have more control over how we play our Switch game, whether we're playing it in handheld mode or in docked mode. In other words, we can force the game to run in docked mode, even though we actually haven't docked the game into our Switch dock, and vice versa. We can also force the game to run in handheld mode. In other words, even though we're running the game in handheld mode, we can push the clocks beyond the restrictions of what we currently have with the Nintendo Switch. And that is, with handheld mode, we can push the GPU to as high as 468 megahertz and the memory clocks to 1.3 gigahertz. Now with a tool like Reverse NX, that does allow us to push those clocks higher, and this is something that's very important when it comes to overclocking our Nintendo Switch games. Now, the second tool that we're going to use is called FPS Locker. Now, this essentially allows us to set custom frame rates in Nintendo Switch games. Essentially, what it does is uncap the frame rates of various games and then allows us to use overclocking tools to push hopefully the frame rates to 60 frames per second. Now, I'll leave links to the various things in the description below, but if you're someone that is, if you're familiar with the Switch homebrew scene, then you're probably already used to these tools, or you're probably already aware of these tools. Now, let's go ahead and jump in. As you can see, when we're running Red Dead Redemption without any type of FPS unlock, you can see that the game runs at 30 frames per second, as we described. Now, if we go ahead and use our FPS Locker tool to set our target frame rate to 60 frames per second, without any overclocking, you can see that we've unlocked the frame rate. Now, the game in this particular mode, in handheld, runs anywhere from about 30 to 45 frames per second. So this is really telling us that the game has more performance than we immediately thought. Of course, having an uncapped frame rate in a retail game is not really something that you would normally do when it comes to the Nintendo Switch. The best option is to enable VSync, of course, and have the game run at a locked 30 FPS. And that's exactly what Double 11 has done here with Red Dead Redemption. So no worries there. Now, the third tool, of course, that we need to use is sys-clk. And this allows us to set overclocking or underclocking of the Nintendo Switch based on various game configurations. So if you go ahead now and set our CPU clocks to the maximum, which is 1.785 megahertz or 1.8 gigahertz, and we set our GPU clocks to 614 megahertz, and the way we can do this in handheld mode is if we connect our Switch to our AC charger. You can see that with an official charger, we have the ability now to push the GPU clocks all the way up to 921 megahertz, which is the max overclock, or the max clock, I should say, of the Switch that we can use with sys-clk. And the most important one is we can now set our memory clocks beyond the maximum 1.6 gigahertz all the way up to about 1.8 gigahertz. Now, I will say that I'm running a version 1 Nintendo Switch, and I'm not using the Mariko chip. Now, if you're lucky enough to have a Mariko revision Nintendo Switch, you should have the ability to push your memory clocks beyond 2 gigahertz. And of course, we've seen with many different Nintendo Switch games out there, when it comes to overclocking, most of the time the bottleneck will be around those memory clocks. The memory bandwidth and the memory clocks really are the kind of the big bottleneck when it comes to many Nintendo Switch games. And as we'll see, Red Dead Redemption is no exception. So with these particular three configurations, you can now see that we can get Red Dead Redemption targeting and hitting 60 frames per second. And this is pretty impressive on a V1 Switch, which only has, like I said, a limited amount of memory overclocking that you can do. But going through the game in various parts of the game, you can see that the frame rate does indeed hit 60 FPS, and in some cases, it's a sustained 60 frames per second lock here. Now, I'm not suggesting that the game runs at 60 FPS locked all the way through, but this is very promising. Now, I will say that I don't have a Mariko revision Switch at the moment, but I'm in the process of getting a Mariko Switch, which we can now push the clocks a lot higher. But I will share some things that I've seen from the community, and I'll leave various links to all these things that I've seen below. With a Mariko revision Switch, you can get a much more stable and a much more fluid 60 FPS across the board. But even without a Mariko revision Switch, as you can see here, Red Dead Redemption 1 is running very well. And this is a credit to Double 11 for the work that they've done with Red Dead Redemption and just the amount of optimization that's gone in. I'm actually quite surprised that the game, without any overclocking and just an uncapped frame rate, can hit frame rates up to 45 FPS. That is very impressive for a stock Nintendo Switch in handheld mode. Now, some other tests that I did here were running the game in dock mode, but unfortunately in dock mode, we have a little less control about what we can actually do. But you can still see here in dock mode, we're getting some really good performance. But I would suggest for those people that are wanting to overclock Red Dead Redemption, then you probably want to stick to handheld mode. Now, another tool that is very useful, as I mentioned, is Reverse NX. And with this, you can set specific targets for the specific modes that you want to use. But at the end of the day, Red Dead Redemption 1 does or can hit 60 frames per second. And I gotta say, this looks absolutely incredible. As you can see, it's silky smooth, and a lot of that kind of input lag that we come to expect from a game like Red Dead Redemption is not eliminated, but is definitely a lot better. And for me, this is the ideal way to play Red Dead Redemption. 60 FPS or up to 60 FPS in handheld mode is a beautiful thing. And as you can see, the game doesn't hitch at all. I've had no issues as far as crashing or glitching or any type of memory or texture issues in the game. The game runs quite well. Now, of course, as I mentioned at the start, overclocking your Switch is something that comes with risks. So if you're not sure how to do it, then please don't do it. But I just wanted to illustrate how impressive Red Dead Redemption can be pushed on a Nintendo Switch with, some moderate overclocking. And I think it really does give me a lot of hope for the future with new Nintendo hardware that is rumored to be coming at some time next year. But for now, I'm going to leave it here for this episode, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, leave me a thumbs up, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye for now.